join you for Susan's memorial. Unfortunately, I can't afford to travel. This is something I can sympathize with. But I did want to share with you a couple of childhood memories. I don't know how much Susan told you of her childhood, since much of it was not happy. My mother, Melissa, was Susan's sister, and they were 14 years apart. Susan was 8 years old when I was born, and was in many ways more like a big sister than an aunt. I spent many weekends at my grandmother's with Susan until she went away to Emma Willard's school. Food was always important to her, even when we were growing up. One of my most enduring memories is spending Saturday night and Sunday morning. Spending Saturday night and Sunday, and on Sunday morning having to go to church. My grandmother converted to Catholicism before Susan was born and was very devout. She was also by this time homebound, and I think she had multiple sclerosis, and wasn't able to attend church. On Sunday morning, Susan and I would walk to church. There were times that we actually attended Mass, but several mornings she would pick up a missal to prove that we had been to church and promptly turn around and have breakfast at Katz's drugstore. We would sit at the counter and have eggs and bacon, hash browns, and toast. We always felt like we were being very wicked, which made the food all the better. Yeah. The problem was that we had to pretend that we hadn't eaten and had attended Mass, so we had to eat 2 breakfasts, which I found hard, but Susan didn't. Since my grandmother was ill, she had a housekeeper, Alberta. Alberta adored Susan and cared for her throughout her childhood. Susan did not adore Alberta. So anything we did in the kitchen, which was Alberta's territory, always had the feeling of being a bit wicked, although Alberta always indulged Susan. Several times we made hard sauce. Hard sauce was made once a year to go with a Christmas steamed pudding, and yet it was never hard since there wasn't any alcohol in the house. So our hard sauce was simply butter, powdered sugar, beaten together. We would eat practically the entire bowl by the spoonful and feel really sick. The last time I saw Susan was at my mother's memorial, and we didn't spend nearly as much time together as we both wished. Then, in the last months before her death, we talked about our childhood memories, and we both regretted not keeping in closer contact over the 30 years. Although I can't be there, I am so happy that our friends will be getting together. I know how important you were to her and how happy she was in Chicago. Sincerely, Madeline.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm glad the quilt is going to her.
Indeed. Is it all packed up?
I think so. Susan showed me a quilt that I believe her mother and her sister made.
Okay.
And it had these lovely, I'm not going to do quilt and all the quilts, but it had these lovely like 1920s and 30s patterns. It was a very classic basket pattern on a white background. And I just thought that it should go to the historical part of the family.
Oh, certainly.
Rather than,
Yeah. Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's going to her.
Well, I have some words regarding Susan and food. Susan and I used to dine out regularly, and every meal provided the occasion for us to guess the ingredients or cooking techniques that made a dish memorable. She was my unerring guide to all things culinary, having tried her hand at all the major cuisines and having mastered most of them. I did not understand, though, that she had gained this knowledge by working her way patiently through a vast number of cookbooks. Over the years, Susan had amassed an enormous library housed in a dozen 7-foot-high bookcases that lined the walls of her apartment. Most of these were, of course, scholarly books, and she also read an incredible number of novels. She once confessed that her happiest hours were spent lying in bed at the end of the day, curled up with her cats and a good book. Despite my many visits to her apartment, though, I didn't appreciate the size of her cooking collection until, as executor of her estate, I invited a book buyer from Powell's to come and look over the library. I advertised it to them as a scholarly library. But alas, many of the scholarly works were, wouldn't you know it, too heavily annotated for him to buy. But his eyes lit up when he came to the cooking section. And he piled up book after book from those shelves. He ended up carrying off over 40 cartons of books, about a third of them cookbooks.
Wow.
After he left, only the dregs of the cooking library remained. But what dregs? Over the next week, I invited Susan's friends and neighbors to take what books they wanted, for the rest were going to be given away, and they made a considerable dent in the remainder of her cookbooks. By the time a book donation company came to pack up and cart off the rest of her library, which still amounted to about 50 cartons, virtually all the cookbooks were gone, save for a few orphans on a bottom shelf. Among them was the complete, and I must stress, complete Time Life series on the foods of the world, consisting of over 24 spiral-bound, food-spattered volumes. That's probably why they didn't get sold. Along with a large collection of soft-bound Chinese cookbooks, written largely in Chinese with minimal English translation. Since I had cut my teeth on Chinese cooking some 40 years ago, I set these books aside for myself, and I started to leaf through them while waiting for the book packers to arrive. I was surprised to discover many dog-eared pages in every volume. Let the bean curd recipes alone suffice to give you some idea of Susan's cooking range. Bean curd with crab, dried bean curd salad with chives, fried rolls of bean curd and shrimp, braised bean curd and vinegar, to name but a few. And I have them downstairs, they're all delicious. Looking at these cookbooks, I finally realized why ordering dim sum with Susan was such an adventure. Indeed, I remember her once perusing a menu in Chinatown while expounding on the virtues of various kinds of turnip dumplings. Despite having enjoyed all too many a cocktail in her dining room, I had no idea what treasures resided on the bookshelf behind me. Treasures on which she had lavished many years of loving labor. Cooking for Susan was not just an avocation, but a reflection of how she lived life. First, whenever she did anything, she did it thoroughly, as the range of bean curd recipes and the accumulated Time Life cooking library attest. Second, she was ever restless, always searching for new dishes, new cuisines, new forms of expression, and was completely undeterred by the need to acquire strange ingredients, difficult cooking techniques, and hard-to-find equipment. This characteristic, by the way, finds its analog in her amazing readiness to acquire new languages in her research. Third, and in a related vein, she was unafraid, always willing to risk the new and unusual, not only in cooking, but in everything she did. I might add that this bravery is all the more courageous when one considers that she was sometimes beset by profound insecurities that led her to question herself, her abilities, and her accomplishments. But she always rebounded from these moments with renewed energy, ready for the next challenge. Cooking was emblematic of her attitude toward life, utterly material, wholly sensual, completely engrossing, totally evanescent, and all poignantly so. It was the very embodiment of the quality that made her so distinctive, her earthy sophistication. Other inspirational
I'm
comments?
supposed to jump in here and
Please.
thank you, first of all, for being our guiding light.